Hey, this is Sam with the BYU Software Training Lab, and in this video, we'll be talking about selections and transformations in Procreate. I'm going to draw little squiggles just so we have something to work with. The selection tool comes first. That's this little S symbol in the top left, next to the wrench in the magic wand. If you click on that, you enter selection mode. We now have this toolbar at the bottom. There's a lot here, but there are 4 main selection tools we need to know. The first is automatic. That means that Procreate will try to select things by itself, based on what you give it. For example, if I tap on this line here, it will select the whole thing, to the best of its ability. The next is freehand. This means you can draw around whatever you want to select, and Procreate will select everything you've drawn inside that area, even if it cuts things apart. Once I select something, it shows this little dotted line around it. To commit to that selection, you tap any other tool. Suddenly, everything other than your selection is shaded. That's important. The shaded part is what you are not selecting. Rectangle is essentially what it sounds like. It draws a rectangle to select things. Be aware that this will select just what is inside the rectangle, not the entire shape. If you want the whole shape, do it yourself with freehand or use automatic. The last is ellipse, which is the same as rectangle, just with an ellipse. Below those, we have a bunch of options for our selection. If add or remove is selected, then whatever you highlight using the 4 tools we just talked about will either add or remove from the selection. For example, if I have this random area selected, I can add or remove an ellipse from it. If you're on freehand and haven't committed to your selection yet, add or remove will determine if you select everything inside your selection or everything outside of your selection. Add is inside, and remove is outside. Invert inverts your selection, selecting only the things that weren't selected before. Copy and paste duplicates your selection onto a new layer. Feather determines the hardness of the edge. You use this by tapping on it and moving the slider. Selections by default have hard edges, so if you want the edge to be less harsh, use feather. I'll copy and paste this selection so you see what I mean. Because we used feather, we selected less of this image around the edges. Save and load lets you save selections, so you can come back to this selection later. You do this by tapping Save and Load and pressing the plus button, or tapping on a previous selection to select that one. If you move things around, it will still go back to that same space on the canvas. Color Fill fills that area with whatever color you have selected in the color panel. This works more like a mode than a button, so if this is selected, every space you select will be filled. You can untap it anytime while still in selection mode. Clear gets rid of your selection. One important aspect of selections is that you can use your selection like a mini canvas. When you paint on a selection, you only affect the selection, nothing else. This only works once you've committed your selection. Also, if you tap and hold on the select icon, it will load your latest selection. You can change the selection mask opacity by going to the Actions tab under the wrench icon and to Preferences and moving the slider at the bottom. This leads into the Transform tool. This is the cursor at the top left, the 4th of the icons. If you just tap on this tool with nothing selected, it will highlight everything in the layer. If you have something selected using the selection tool, it will automatically let you transform just that selection. Once you have a selection, you can move it around by dragging anywhere. You can resize it using the blue dots along the selection edges, and rotate it using the green dot. The yellow dot rotates the orientation of your selection. This can change the way things are transformed. The Transform tool also has 4 main tools at the bottom and a bunch of other toggles. These 4 main tools are different ways to transform something. The first is Freeform. This lets you drag the blue dots wherever you like, changing the shape, length, height, etc. of the selection, regardless of any other measurements. Uniform keeps the shape the same relative to itself, while still allowing you to change size and orientation. So if I have this shape selected, it will stay this shape regardless of how or where I move it. Distort pulls the object around, depending on where the blue dots are, like stretching dough. This can be really helpful for putting objects in perspective, like art on a wall or a computer screen. Warp is a little weirder. Warp uses a mesh to push and pull different points of your image. This can be really helpful for things like putting a design on a curved surface in your image. Now let's go through these options at the bottom. First is snapping. This means that your selection will automatically move itself to places like the middle of the screen. This makes it much easier to line things up. For warp, instead of the snapping option, we have the advanced mesh option. Advanced mesh is a way to fine-tune your changes and move the mesh around in more subtle ways. You can flip your whole selection, horizontal or vertical. You can rotate it 45 degrees, or you can size it up to fit the whole canvas. Bilinear is the interpolation of the transform. Interpolation is how Procreate fills in the edge gaps made by sizing something up a ton, and when it suddenly takes up way more pixels than before. This refers only to the edges. If we tap on Bilinear, we get the interpolation menu. Nearest neighbor considers only the pixels on each side of the edge in question. Bilinear is a good middle ground, considering a 2x2 grid of pixels surrounding the edge. And bicubic considers the 16 surrounding pixels. Bilinear is the default. All of these can be useful for different types of transforms. Finally, the reset button resets your selection. In every selection mode except warp, if you tap on the sides of the screen, Procreate will move your selection in tiny increments, allowing you to perform micro changes in your image. To show this, I'm going to draw a line right here for reference, and then come back and move this there. It's moving very slightly. And that is selections and transforms in Procreate. In the next video, we'll be talking about custom brushes in Procreate.